Welcome back to Tipping Point. I'm your host, Kara McKinney. The left finds itself in another familiar conundrum. First, it was the COVID vaccines, then it was the border crisis, and now it's crime. In each of those three situations, it was more or less easy for the mainstream media and all the left's captured institutions to gaslight regular Americans about what was really going on, because those three situations hadn't yet begun to affect people's daily lives. However, slowly but surely, the more people who took the COVID vaccines and either got sick anyway or had a severe side effect from them made it harder and harder for the media to sell the next round of boosters. Eventually, the vaccine passport mandates fell away in even the most hardcore pandemic-fearing locales. Ditto for the border. In 2016, it was easy for low-information voters to laugh along with late-night comedians about how racist and evil Trump was for a stance on the border, but after only a few short years of uncontrolled illegal immigration under Biden affecting people's daily lives, well, Axios now reports that half of Americans, including over 40% of Democrats, agree with President Trump's calls for mass deportations. Well, now we have a similar dynamic happening with crime. Our next guest tonight writes about this for the Wall Street Journal. He writes in part, quote, "Americans think crime is on the rise, but the media keep telling them they're wrong." A Gallup survey last year found that 92% of Republicans and 58% of Democrats thought crime was increasing. A February Rasmussen Report survey found that 61% of likely voters say violent crime in the U.S. is getting worse, while only 13% think it's getting better. Journalists purport to refute this by citing official crime statistics showing a downward trend. Americans aren't mistaken. News reports fail to take into account that many victims aren't reporting crimes to the police, especially since the pandemic, end quote. Joining us now to discuss this piece is its author, Dr. John Lott, the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. Dr. Lott, thanks for being here tonight.
Oh, it's great to talk to you again. Thanks for having me on.
Great. So what does the media want us to believe about crime rates, and why are they wrong?
Well, who knows what's going on inside their mind? All I can tell you is that they're wrong on this stuff. You know, maybe they don't understand how the crime numbers are put together or what they mean, but there are two different measures that we have of crime. One is the FBI crime reports that counts up the number of crimes that victims report to police. And then we have national crime victimization data, which goes out and tries to give us a measure of total crime, both reported and unreported crimes. And while it's true that reported crimes have fallen in the last couple of years after a huge increase in 2020 and 2021, what you find is that if you look, for example, between 2021 and 2022, there was a 2% drop in the FBI's measure of reported crimes. But in terms of total crimes, reported and unreported, what you find from the National Crime Victimization Survey is that there was a 42% increase that occurred over that same time period. And there's a simple reason for that, and that is law enforcement in the United States has collapsed. If you look at cities with more than 1 million people, though this is true generally, if you look at cities with more than 1 million people, in the 5 years before COVID, 44% of violent crimes resulted in arrest. It started falling in 2020. By 2022, it was down to 20%. So the arrest rate went from 44% of violent crimes that were reported to 20%. There was an even bigger drop in arrests for property crimes. But just to give you an idea, some perspective on this, if you look at arrests as a percentage of all crimes, reported and unreported, only 8% of those violent crimes result in arrest, and only 1% of property crimes in those cities result in arrest. And that's just arrests. You don't have all those people who are arrested being charged, and not all those who are charged are prosecuted, let alone convicted. And so, you know, you're talking about criminals essentially facing no risk now in these large cities for going and committing violent crime, and really absolutely no risk at all for committing property crimes. And so is it surprising that there's this big increase in crime? No.